the ISJ this quarter. We've also got Nina Power, who's the author of One Dimensional Woman and a senior lecturer of philosophy at Roehampton. And finally we've got Hester Eisenstein, who's over from the States to speak, and he's also the author of an ebook called Feminism Seduced. So I'm going to take their speakers in that order. They're going to speak for approximately half an hour, and then we'll open it up for questions and contributions from the floor. So I'll hand you over to Judy Thorpe.
That's not half an hour each, just in case you're wondering how we're going to do this. You will have time to contribute as well. Right, well, I want to start with saying, well, this phrase, the new sexism, it's like maybe did we ever not have sexism and suddenly it's new again or something? Well, just to clarify, I think the term new sexism is because we're talking about a development that maybe looks a bit different, and why is it? And I want to identify what makes anything new about the sexism we're experiencing today compared to just good old-fashioned sexism that's been around for a very long time. And I think some of the difference is because it comes after decades where women are meant to have had it all, aren't we? We are represented in layers of society that there wouldn't have been women 100 years ago. We have got jobs that women may have been barred from by law or perhaps just by tradition over a couple of generations ago. And so much so, in terms of how far we've come and the gains that we've made, that some people think that not only do we have it all, but we got too much, don't they? I mean, there is people who think we live in a post-feminist society because really all of that women's rights stuff was fine for the 1970s, but now, hey, you don't need it. We're living in this society, and I mean, there's plenty of people complain. I don't know if people remember Michael Burke, the journalist, who said that masculinity had gone out of fashion, and he was really pissed off because there's too many women in the media, too many women in the BBC and Channel 4 and everything else. Well, I don't think so, do you? I mean, do you think we're complaining that there's too many women who are high profile? Apart from, the people that want to do all the sort of the pundits who want to talk about what the wives of the politicians are wearing, which shoes they're wearing today and all the rest of it. Really, women in the media aren't necessarily, all powerful, that Michael Burke is getting his knickers in a twist. I think we should say that really male chauvinist pigs should have gone out of fashion a long time ago, people like him. The fact he's got the confidence to say something like that today shows that there is people who think that there is time for a shift change, time to keep these women down. But I think the key thing about the new sexism is that actually some of it absorbs and has assimilated some of the history of struggle, of the language, of the aspirations, of struggles of women to have independence, to have sexual liberation, to be an independent woman. And therefore you have a situation where really, for one of the greatest fights, part of the women's liberation movement was the fight for sexual liberation, for women to have sexual confidence, to assert themselves, to assert their desires, to not just be a mere object for somebody else. And actually what the new sexism and what some other authors have called the raunch culture or pornification of popular culture or whatever they've said is actually, it is in a way that us challenging the idea that we're just more than mere objects for other people's desires, it's turned this desire and this liberation into something that's become its opposite. That we're actually being turned all the more into objects of desire than actually the subjects of our own desires and what we want to do. And what I mean by this is, I think that in ever more shocking ways there is a seepage, if you like, into popular mainstream culture of images, values, behaviour, and etc., from what people would call in the selling for sex industry. You've got a situation where, if you think of the Belle de Jour fantasy, on the TV, where prostitution is really a fantastic career choice, where you get to wear lots of fancy clothes, meet a lot of rich men, and have a lot of sex if you're into sex. I mean, that's really how prostitution in some parts of popular culture is shown, not the reality of what it is for the majority of women who find themselves in prostitution. And I think when you talk about things like the lap dancing clubs, now, stripping is not a new phenomenon, no way. But stripping down the back street, being a bit ashamed, is one thing. But big corporate billion-dollar business, which is what Spearmint Rhino and those other lap dancing clubs, this has taken on, a new stage. And not only is it big business, but hey, it's so fun and ironic in this post-liberated world that, come on women, get down there too, have a good night out. And if you don't want to do that, well, you're a bit of a prude. Aren't you a bit repressed? don't you get with the program? This is all about having fun and, being sexually liberated. And so this is what's going on. It's the twist, if you like, of selling it to us as something that is empowering and liberating. And this goes for everything. I mean, there was the pole dancing company that teaches pole dancing and saying it's part of, helping with women's self-esteem issues, to give them physical confidence about their body. So learn to gyrate around a pole, and this is going to help with your self-esteem. Or there is the course, and I mean, the tabloids love this sort of thing, but actually I do think we have to be critical of it as well. A course, 6 weeks course on how to walk on your high heels, again, to deal with your self-esteem issues. Now, I'm all for people, any sense of having ability to have self-esteem, but the idea that the only way to build your self-esteem as a woman is to fulfill this narrow caricature of what is a sexy woman, for me, isn't good enough. This isn't liberating, it isn't empowering, it's actually fulfilling a new sort of image that we've got to do, got to conform to. It's not more choice. And so therefore I think that what has happened is what capitalism does to everything if we let it. Any sort of rebellion and difference can be assimilated and sold back to us to make a profit for somebody if we let it. And therefore our sexual liberation, the fact that women have sexual confidence, can express their desires and be autonomous, can be in itself assimilated and sold back to us as, well, that means you want to hang out in a lap dancing club, or that means you might want to wear 10 feet tall stilettos, or whatever it happens to be. And actually this is how the thing can be distorted. So, so companies, a big peace movement, we can sell you trainers with peace signs on them. Or you're into food that hasn't been through the big conglomerate with lots of chemicals, so we'll have big corporate organic food business. Isn't it? Things can be assimilated by capitalism in that way. And I mean, even to be honest, other aspects of sexual liberation is, the idea that because men clearly do some more housework than they did because of women working and everything else, you can see cleaning products advertised at men with turbo in the title and this sort of thing, turbo oven cleaners. Those are directed at men, so they don't feel embarrassed about the fact that they actually do some cleaning, which is seen as a woman's thing. And look out for it now, there's a whole host of these things. But this is how the system, if you like, can adapt in some way to changes, but can try and absorb them to do the only thing it wants to do really, bottom line, which is to make a profit. And I think that when we look at this, and when I talk about the idea that sexual liberation has become another commodity, you are talking about a situation where there is a prism through which capitalism throws everything, it distorts it, and that's what I think it is doing to the idea of what is women's sexuality. And I think the idea of this idea of sexual liberation with a twist, the twist is we're being sold commodification, but we're being told it's empowering and wonderful, does mean that we have to respond to it in a different way. And I think, so therefore, when people say, it's just a choice to do this, it's just a choice that people want to be stick thin and have enormous breasts, and if they go and get cosmetic surgery to fulfill this dream of theirs, well, that's their own individual choice. I think we have to look at it a little bit more critically, don't we? Why is it that breast enhancement surgery is on the huge increase? There is something to be said, isn't there, about society? That women feel defined about the cup size of their brow. This is not something that we fought for. This is backwards looking, isn't it? Towards the idea of us trying to look like a Barbie doll, which is actually something that should have really gone out of fashion in the 1950s. And I think all of this, whether it's now the new extremes of toe shortening, so that your toes don't hang over the front of your stilettos, or the heel implants, so you've got some padding for those big shoes, you name it, there's all sorts of new things they think up that you didn't even know you needed, in order to fulfill this a gendered torture, if you like, to crush you into this narrow cliche of what a woman should look like. And I just think it's degrading for women and for men. Degrading for women in an obvious way, degrading for men, that actually this is what men maybe want if you're heterosexual, out of how women should look and appear and feel about their bodies. You might as well get us on a shelf with a price tag on us. It's so obviously turning us into a commodity. And I think this is really what Karl Marx talked about in terms of how things can be turned into a commodity in modern capitalism. A situation where really even the most sort of intimate parts of our lives, our sexuality, our ability to labour, get turned into something alien to us, something that can be bought and sold. And this is what is happening. And I think, therefore, one thing I want to make clear is, for us, for me as a socialist, as a revolutionary, I don't want to turn around and actually be, censorious about some of the stuff I don't like that's around, whether it's lads' minds or whatever. I don't believe banning, crushing, saying this is, the Tories do. They make a fuss about the sexualisation of children, but they come from it from a different point of view from me as a revolutionary. I want more sexual openness, more confidence, more explicit and sympathetic sex education in schools for young people. I don't want to crush it and put it back in the box. I don't want to go back to the 1950s where people didn't even have the language to express their desires and needs. I want to have it more openness. So, this is, you can get accused sometimes, can't you? Oh, you're just being prudish. We want this, I don't want to clamp down on these things. Well, no, I don't want to clamp down on anything, but I want more choice, real self-expression. And therefore we don't stand on the Tories in that, with the Tories in that at all. Because the Tories just want us to be demure housewives or walking incubators with no rights to abortion and all the rest of it. It's made clear, isn't it, by what they've said about the family. Frank Field is now playing the game behind them about saying all we want is a man to look after us. That's all that women want. And I believe this is something that is we should reject. Because for me, the role of the family is actually what structures and shapes the whole role that women play in the system. Yes, 50% almost of the workforce in Britain are women. Yes, most adult women work for the majority of their adult life, but the fact is we're still defined by the private sphere of the home as being really where our main life should be, and therefore everything else we should be except flexible, low-paid jobs. But for me, that actually, it shows that how the family still plays an important role in the roots of women's oppression today. And I think, it's eulogised everywhere, isn't it, as the ultimate dream for us all, whether it's in advertising or by the politicians or the magazines and everything else. And actually, for me, I think that we actually, the place for us to find a liberation for these sorts of stereotypes and cliches that we're constantly meant to fulfil is actually in fighting collectively. And actually, I don't know how many of you were in the opening rally on Thursday night. I thought one of the high points was the BA cabin crew woman speaking, because she showed me, when people talk about the working class being feminised, well, if it's being feminised by a woman like her, this is something I would be jolly pleased about. But I believe, because people often talk about it becoming more precarious and people can't fight and can't organise, actually women are a permanent part of the workforce. We're here to stay. We're not going back in the box. Whatever the Tories might want, they need us as well. And therefore, for me, people like that woman, whose name we can't even say because it's so backward in this country that trade unions can't even say their names for fear of victimisation, but women like that, organising collectively, can challenge the sexist stereotypes, because those women in the cabin crew are the perfect sexist stereotype, aren't they? How they have to dress, makeup, it's all in their contract, and yet when they fight, they are workers. When they organise, they are workers. And for me, that's the opportunity both to fight against the stereotypes and the cliches and all of the sexist imagery, as well as fight for something a lot different, a society really, where women are not discriminated against and not trivialised and not treated as sex objects for other people, but can play a true part, equal part of building a socialist society.
A quick announcement. Anna Gluckstein, Natalie's mum, could you please go to the creche if you're in this meeting? Okay. Oh, it's not Natalie's. Okay, sorry. I think I got that right. Anyway, sorry, our next speaker is Nina Power. As I said, she's the author of One Dimensional Woman, and she's a senior lecturer in philosophy at Roehampton University.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a microphone?
Yeah?
Alright. Okay, well, this paper, I'm not going to do that political rising speech because it's not really my thing, so I'm going to read some sort of facts and quotes and things. The title of my paper is The New Sexism and the Recession. I think, obviously, the title of this panel is The New Sexism. Untangling the nature of this purported new sexism is a tricky task. Is it so new, as Judith asked? Where does it lie? Who perpetuates it? To my mind, though, the question of sexism, new or otherwise, is inseparable from the question about women's global relation to the economy and the way in which women are positioned in the labour force. Even more specifically, it requires looking at what has happened to the labour force in relation to the current economic crisis and seeing how the differential valuation of men and women as workers and of the way in which work is positioned sometimes as women's work, and we can talk about the feminisation of labour and all of these kinds of things, about the rise of the service industry and so on, is played out. And I think there are some interesting and perhaps surprising shifts, and some of these shifts are quite kind of difficult to analyse in a way, try and work out why they've happened in terms of who gets laid off and why. In January this year, The Economist, that bastion of kind of feminist thought, ran an issue dedicated to the fact that for the first time in history, women made up more than 50% of the American workforce. Okay? And this is you can see the issue, it's kind of battered, but they use Rosie the Riveter as this kind of great hero. We did it, is the slogan. They herald this fact as something extremely positive. They said women's economic empowerment is arguably the biggest social change of our times. Just a generation ago, women were largely confined to repetitive menial jobs. They were routinely subjugated to casual sexism and were expected to abandon their careers when they married and had children. Today, they say, millions of brains have been put to more productive use. I like that kind of behavioural description of brains being used. Clearly then, for the pro-free market economist, women's mass and now quantitatively superior inclusion in the workplace of more than 50% is a good thing. There are problems, though, that even they have to acknowledge. Women are still underrepresented at the top of companies, they say. Only 2% of bosses in the US and only slightly more in the UK. They are paid significantly less, as we know. They further point out that, quote, juggling work and child rearing is difficult. But, they say, there are plenty of cheaper, subtler ways, other than using the state to help them out, in which governments can make life easier for women. They could close schools at midday, thus allowing women to pick up their kids in the afternoon, and somehow work as well. The US can introduce, they say, a useful and humane length of time for maternity leave. Whilst The Economist is purporting to look at the bigger structural picture, there are, not surprisingly, a series of questions left over and unanswered. We have the obvious assumption underlying their piece that women must still nevertheless be responsible for childcare, or be the primary carer, even as their entry into the workplace is to be celebrated, not least because they are paid, quote, significantly less. We have the awareness but not the exploration of the central contradiction between production and reproduction. Children are seen as a problem to be dealt with by shorter hours at school, for example, but do not necessitate any more significant reflection on the central and contradictory demands of capitalism, namely the long-term demand for the replenishment of the workforce combined with the desire not to pay for it in the short term. We can see the most tragic examples of this kind of contradiction in the way in which richer countries can cherry-pick the employees they want, doctors, nurses, engineers and so on, men and women, from poorer countries, whilst leaving those countries bereft of homegrown talent that those countries have invested by educating them in the first place. The asymmetry of capitalism pays no heed to the specific demands of individual countries if it can use differential pay to cross boundaries, while simultaneously relying on a nationalist and racist rhetoric of anti-immigration and quotas when from time to time the economy shrinks. Back to women. We think of women's mass entry into the workforce as a positive thing, because we believe it allows women to have greater political and social power. This is absolutely true. Certainly we cannot go backwards, as Judith said. We now know, for example, Marx and Engels talked about this, that women do not have any natural domestic role to play. Women do not have a natural position. There's no natural role at all, in a way. Yet if the kind of work that women are doing is actually removing them from the possibility of having social and political power, which would be one of the long-term ambitions of feminism in relation to work, i.e. by paying them incredibly badly for long hours, forcing them to rely on the exploitation of other, often poor immigrant women to care for their children so that they themselves can go out to work, by not allowing them to join unions and so on, then the emancipatory dream of a feminism that sees work as the solution to the shackles of patriarchy is utterly incomplete, if that work is yet another form of oppression. We do not resolve or take apart the model of the patriarchal breadwinner by adding women to the roster, making both partners in a couple work for the same or less money than would have been the case several decades ago with a single breadwinner. If there is indeed a so-called man session, it's a lovely word, a man session taking place in the US at least, okay, so the idea that more men are being laid off than women, it is not simply because the kind of work that men and women tend to do have been disproportionately affected by the economic downturn. Okay, so this is the argument that, for example, building work slows massively as the housing market collapses, and this disproportionately affects men because men are more likely to be builders and that sort of thing. It's also in part because employers know they can pay women less, particularly if they don't have pesky European things like maternity pay to worry about. As one writer in The Atlantic puts it, could it be that the advantage men have enjoyed regarding pay differentials is coming back to haunt them now? Women have been making around 78 cents to every dollar men make, holding experience and actual job constant. In a recession where cost-cutting is at a premium, it makes good economic sense for companies to cut the higher cost, equal-performing employee. So given the historic and ongoing pay differential between women and men are getting cut at higher rates. This is not emancipation for anyone. Clearly, it is a race to the bottom in which everyone loses, men and women. And I think this is sort of crucial point that capitalism can selectively remember when men and men and women are women. It decides when it's useful to describe them in that way. 3 minutes, that's perfect. On the cultural level, we've witnessed a kind of backlash against the kind of work hard, play hard image of the woman that emerged in the 90s, the idea of the ladette. Clearly there's a class dimension here as well, the fear of a kind of drunken, unconstrained working class woman who's kind of sexually libertarian or whatever. But there's also a broader kind of disapproval. You can join the workforce, but don't spend your money in a way that makes your sex vulgar. The feminine supplement, the so-called pinkification or princessification, if that's even really a word, princessification of young girls in particular can be seen in some sense, I think, as a way of warding off the fear of female achievement, total female achievement. You can get top grades and top jobs, but for goodness sake, act nicely about it. Don't frighten the horses and so on. Crush your enemies, pamper yourself. Sorry, I read that. I think it's extremely important, though, that we place these cultural shifts and these kind of like cultural backlashes in the wider economic context and work out what role they play vis-à-vis the shifting patterns of male-female employment, particularly in a time of economic crisis and recession. Far more importantly, to my mind, than sort of ghettoised questions of pornification or hypersexualisation or even debates about sex work, although they are important, my worry here is that if you just focus on those kind of questions of sexuality and so on, that it becomes a kind of moral and aesthetic question and not a political and economic question and not a global contextual question. I think what we really need to be looking at if we are to be Marxist feminists is really the question of women's labour in the global context and what it truly means for women to have entered into the workforce in such unprecedented numbers, particularly when the emergence of women anywhere near the top depends so heavily on the second-hand internal exploitation of women at the bottom. Thank you.
Our third speaker is Eisenstein. She's a professor of sociology at Queen's College, and I can't read that either. She's written several books, including one on contemporary feminist thought, and her latest book is Feminism Seduced.
Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel, and I'm going to just bring a little U.S. perspective to the discussion. And what caught my eye in preparing for today was an article that appeared in the New York Times in, I think it was June 14th this year, by a guy named Ross Douthat, D-O-U-T-H-A-T. And he was talking about the fact that there were two very prominent corporate women running for primaries, Senate primaries, which is the first round of election in California. One is Carly Fiorina, who had run Hewlett-Packard till they fired her, and the other was Meg Whitman, who was the head of eBay. So very rich, very powerful corporate women now entering politics. And he said this was an absolute indicator of the triumph of feminism. Now, the ideas of the women's movement, said he, are totally mainstream. And, it's almost like in neon lights. Women can do anything. Women can have it all. And there was a furious response, of course, especially this that I'm on, which includes some distinguished feminist historians like Barbara Winslow and Roz Baxendale. And they put on the listserv the answers that the eloquent, the informed, the detailed, intelligent answers that the New York Times did not print, trying to refute this thesis. So I think it's a very important kind of moment, because to me it signals the success of capitalist ideology, which preaches equal opportunity, not equality of outcomes, by the way, equal opportunity and female power. So the argument is discrimination is over. Women are no longer victims, as we've heard. They can play with sexuality the way men do. They can play with power the way men do. End of story. And so this notion that this kind of entry of powerful corporate women into the political process signals the end of any need to fight discrimination against women. So, and of course, this signals a certain kind of feminism which is devoid of any critique of the status quo. It's very celebratory. And I guess I was thinking about this, and my mind inevitably turned to Sarah Palin. Why does everybody laugh when you say Sarah Palin? It's like automatic, right? And I think because encapsulated in Sarah Palin a lot of very interesting contradictions. So she now is running around. As you know, she was governor of Alaska, but she got tired of it after she wasn't elected vice president, thank the Lord. And so now she's become a poster girl for the Tea Party, which is our new political phenomenon on the right. And she's an interesting character because, of course, she represents what feminism fought for, the right of women to all areas, to enter all areas of political and social and economic life, right? That was one of the major themes of 70s feminism. And of course, she's against most of what we would call the typical feminist agenda. She opposes abortion. And actually, she has chose to give birth to a Down syndrome child, which in a certain way shows a lot of courage, rather than have an abortion, but she uses that then to beat everybody else over the head if they choose to take a different path. And she represents also a certain kind of dialed-up Reaganism, if I can put it that way. And the argument is the state should take a back seat to business, to the market, to the free market. So it's a quasi-libertarian position, which always fascinates me. People run for office trashing the state, you know. It's a kind of a contradiction. But I guess they're running for office to get elected and then limit the role of the state, except for their job. So it's a neoliberal position, all power to the market. And it's the Tea Party people say amazing things. I don't know if you follow it over here, but it's pathologically anti-state. Anti-government, anti-government intervention, anti-anything Franklin Roosevelt ever did. And my favorite thing, people walking around with posters during the big debate about healthcare. You know, we had this convulsive debate about healthcare recently, and my favorite poster was, "The government should keep their hands off my Medicare." Now, Medicare, is a government program which was brought in, an extension of healthcare that was brought in by Lyndon Johnson in the 60s. So isn't that wonderful? Government should keep their hands off my Medicare. Incredibly ignorant, contradictory, but there's something there. It's galvanizing a certain level of the electorate. Now, you know that when Obama won his health care bill, it was by catering to preserving the near monopoly power of health insurance companies. Ironically, seen as unwarranted extension of state power, even though it was a total rejection of anything like what you have here, or they have in Canada, or in France, or even in Australia. It really just enshrines the power of the insurance companies, and yet it was fought tooth and nail as the state moving too much into our lives. So I think that, to go back to what has capitalism done to feminism, it's really no surprise that capitalist ideological forces have had such success in reshaping the original ideas of women's liberation. I mean, after all, this is what they do full time. But what I want to specify here, and picks up a little bit of what previous speakers said, is that when the central demand of the women's movement for paid work was accommodated by corporations seeking women's cheaper labor, that demand was effectively divorced from those other demands that would have led to more fundamental change. And just to give you a brief list: universal child care, an end to sexual violence, rape, incest, battering, an end to militarism and war, an end to the possibility of sexual self-determination, an end to the objectification of women and other oppressed people, and most fundamentally an end to hierarchies of race, class, gender, and so forth. So the selective acceptance, of this one demand, which met the needs of corporations for a whole new reserve army of labor, both in the developed world and in the global south, leads to a new level of sexual exploitation, from low-wage, insecure jobs to maquiladoras or sweatshops to massive trafficking in women, which is such an incredible increase in recent years. And so I think that we have to see this clearly and say, yes, we want to hold on to that. I'm not suggesting, with the other speakers, yes, I'm not saying let's go back to the kitchen. Obviously, entry to paid work represents independence, represents choice for women. But taking that by itself is not enough. We have to go back to the rest of that feminist agenda, which is really an agenda for socialist feminism. Thank you.
Just so you're aware, there's a microphone at the front of the hall. We'd invite you to come up and speak there because the meeting is being recorded and so everybody can hear you. And if you limit your contributions to around 3 minutes, that'd be fantastic. So they're